Hi, this is Dodie Friedenberg, and this recording will be a shorter version of my 1-hour overview of Salesforce Administrator skills. In some ways, this overview might be a little bit more overwhelming, even though it's shorter, because I'm basically going to read through what's on the screen and attempt to refrain from explaining too much as I go along. So this is intended for anyone who's new to Salesforce and wants to get an overview of some of what's available in Salesforce. Also for people who are studying Salesforce administration skills to know what you need to know. And also if you're preparing to pass the Salesforce Administrator Certification exam, this will also give you an overview of the skills and knowledge you need to do well on the exam. So here we go. It all starts with data and data storage. Just like a filing cabinet, a place for everything and everything in its place, using good relational database practices such as storing one kind of information in each field and storing information where there can be multiple related pieces of information in a separate object. And so Salesforce is the leading CRM software provider in the cloud. CRM stands for Customer Relationship Management. And that means that we're going for that 360-degree view of your constituents. So everybody can see everything they need to see about a customer, and that might include in a sales environment, the company information, every contact person who might have anything to do with an opportunity, and an opportunity would represent a sale. In a nonprofit setting, an opportunity might represent a donation. Any cases that have been submitted from that company, cases representing service requests, for example, the products that the company has purchased in the past, the assets, meaning the things that they own that we've sold them, and the marketing that has been done to them, and on and on and on. All of the and all the connections that have been made, the phone calls, the emails, the meetings, everything is stored in one place, not on separate spreadsheets, so that Salesforce kind of becomes the source of truth for. Really, in many organizations, it can become sort of the backbone and everything that you need to all your workflow processes and all your data storage, a lot of automation to make things more efficient can all happen through Salesforce. So we get standard objects with Salesforce, and we get the ability to create custom objects in Salesforce, so you can really store any data that you need to store and create workflows around any of that data. And so it's all built on a platform. Used to be called the Force.com platform. Now I think it's just referred to as the Salesforce.com platform. And what do we mean by platform? I think what we mean is that everything you're about to see lives on this platform, and also the ability to integrate other applications into your Salesforce org, your ability to build out other aspects of your business's needs on this platform. And also Salesforce has a number of clouds like Marketing Cloud and Health Cloud and Education Cloud and Nonprofit Cloud and others that also live on top of this platform. And so it provides you with tools, the tools we're about to go through, to manage both the standard CRM objects that come with Salesforce and your custom objects and workflows. So the main core objects in Salesforce are accounts, contacts, opportunities, leads, cases, and users, meaning your Salesforce users. And then in a sales environment where you're selling products, or even in a nonprofit environment, perhaps where you are selling products, you have your products, your price books, contracts, assets, and many, many, many more objects that come standard with Salesforce. So there's no point in storing all of that data if we can't get it out in useful visualizations so that we can answer the questions about our data and about our key performance, what's the I stand for? Key indicators, key performance indicators. And we do that with reports and dashboards. There are 4 report formats to choose from. 2 are illustrated here, the summary report, and we can see that because there's grouping on a field, and then there are records within that group, and there can be calculations, both standard and custom, on those summary rows. We can also have a matrix report where we take a second grouping and put it across the top. So we here are grouping by the kind of customer, and across here by a rating. And then the intersection of each row and column heading gives you statistics, and you can put a number of different statistics in each intersection of the grid. Also, clicking on an intersection of the grid will show you the records that make up that section of the grid. There are 2 other report types. One is called tabular, which is just a basic rows and columns like a mailing list. And the other is called a joined report, which means you can place, in effect, different reports side by side. And those reports blocks can have different underlying report types, meaning different underlying objects and objects related to each other. A lot more on that to come. And then, of course, dashboards let you take those reports that you've built and represent them graphically on a dashboard with up to 20 different components on each dashboard and many, many, many options to configure those dashboard components to show just what you need them to show. Also, the ability to filter the dashboards and much, much more. So that's a big topic. It gets its own page later on. So I'm going to tuck that away over here in this section. And so in between data storage and pulling the data out in reports and dashboards, we have our user interface and our productivity tools and our automation, which is where the magic happens. So let's see what we have. Security. Security is a huge topic in Salesforce. It gets its own page coming up. So we'll tuck that away up here. And next we have content. This is a smaller topic, but an important topic if your organization uses content. This is the ability to create libraries of materials that you can put together into packages and send to a customer, for example, which they can then open and review, and you can see that they've opened and reviewed it. Files of information. Communities is a whole separate topic. This is your ability to create a portal into your Salesforce instance from the outside. And this could be for customers, for partners, for other kinds of constituents. And you can allow them partial access to your actual Salesforce data, or you can provide a number of other tools to create a sense of community among your customers or partners, provide them with information that they need. For example, you can give them solutions, you can give them knowledge articles, you can create an area where they can help each other. And we've all seen this, where people post questions and other people from the community pile on and try to help answer their questions. And then ideas is a place where you can provide your customers the ability to submit their ideas for improvements in your products, bug fixes, and software enhancements, etc. And so Salesforce has its own community. It used to be called the Success Community. Now it's called the Trailblazer Community. And that's where Salesforce provides all of those kinds of things that hopefully, if you're learning to be a Salesforce administrator, you've created a login for yourself in the Trailblazer community. You are finding those community groups and attending those user group meetings. You can find the Salesforce documentation there, knowledge articles, people asking and answering questions, and submitting ideas. Now, the App Exchange is like the Apple Store, but for Salesforce. And so you can go there and search for free and paid apps, reports, and dashboards that you can just install. There are small little utility apps, and there are large whole programs out there to meet almost every need. We can read reviews the customers have left, read product documentation. Many apps allow you to demo the product for a period of time. So that's a whole world to explore as well. Org setup. For Salesforce administrators, this is sort of that key setup information that you generally set it and forget it. But the company information is a good place to go for information about your licenses, how many you have, how many are used, your data storage, how much data space you have left. Locale versus language is important to distinguish, multi-currency versus advanced currency management, and a few other topics in that area. And so now we have the big buckets. I didn't mention marketing, but I'll go into that in a minute, and user interface. These are the big buckets of information that you need to know as a Salesforce administrator, and buckets of features. So let's flesh it out a little bit. So within the data storage area, we have the ability to create different objects or to understand the existing objects and their relationships to each other. So many objects have a one-to-many relationship to each other, also referred to as parent and child relationships, many-to-many relationships through a junction object, master detail versus lookup relationships. Both of these kinds of fields create those relationships between objects, and these two have slightly different capabilities and restrictions. So data types has to do with the different fields that exist and that you can create. You can create custom fields on both standard objects and on your custom objects. And there are, I think, 25 or more different field types to choose from. There are several different text field types. There are pick list fields. There are number fields, currency fields, date and time fields, and many, many more, including the master detail field and the lookup relationship field and a couple other that I'll mention next. So these are the lookup fields, which create related lists of child objects. Formula fields are very powerful fields that allow you to do calculations or concatenate text to manipulate your data within the object, which can then become available in your reports and dashboards. And another powerful use for formula fields is to create a formula field on a child record, on the child object, so that data from a parent object can be displayed at the child level. Roll-up summary fields are sort of the opposite. Because a parent can have many children, we can say at the parent object, create a field there and roll up into that field information from all the children. So we could do a sum of all of the amounts, for example. We could do an average of all of the amounts. We could get a minimum amount or a minimum date, meaning, for example, give me the first opportunity for this account, or a maximum, give me the most recent opportunity for this account. And so a roll-up summary is on a parent, it's evaluating all of the children and rolling that data up to the parent. Pick lists can be created, and we can have controlling and dependent pick lists, meaning the choice that you make in one field determines the choices in a second field. There's also something called a multi-select pick list, which is very tempting to create for users, but is something to really avoid because of the challenges of reporting on such a field. Next, we can set validation rules, which help keep the data clean. We can restrict what users can enter and make sure that they've entered things properly before they can save the record. We can set up duplicate prevention to try to prevent duplicates from being created and to help find those duplicates. We can set field history tracking for up to 20 fields per object. So that would show us who made a change to one of those 20 fields, on what date, what was the old value, what was the new value. And moving into data management, we have the ability to mass update addresses, to mass delete records, to mass transfer the ownership of records. We have two and more data import tools. One is called the Data Import Wizard, which is standard to Salesforce and very limited on which field objects you can import to. There's also a desktop app called Data Loader that is free, that can import and export and delete records in every object in Salesforce, or almost all of them, many objects. We have a data export service, which we can set up to run weekly or monthly in most cases, which downloads your data, the data that you specify, into a series of zip files, which you then download to your desktop manually, weekly or monthly. And there is a recycle bin where when users delete records, it stays in there for 15 days. Users can, if you give them permission, access their recycle bin and restore records from there. And as the system administrator, you can access the recycle bin for the entire organization. And you can use Workbench to query the recycle bin to get more information than you see in the recycle bin in the UI about each record that's been deleted. So moving on to another section, we have activities. And this area is a little confusing in its terminology because within activities, we have tasks, we have calls, we have events, we also have emails, which I'll bring that up next. So emails, tasks, calls, and events are all basically the same record in the same object, but the way that they're entered is slightly different to try to make it easier for the users. So when a user has already made a phone call and wants to log that in Salesforce, they can choose log a call, and it will automatically set the status to completed because presumably the call's already been made, versus a task, which presumably is something you plan to do in the future. And tasks kind of create that tickler file that reminds you of keeping up with your constituents. Events are similar, but they have an end time and the ability to put a location in there for an event or meeting. And email lets you actually compose and send the email right from Salesforce and log it as a task. There's additional email functionality built into Salesforce with a letterhead that you can use on templates. There's integrations with Gmail and Outlook. And there's the ability to, from any email program, use a BCC link, and the email will get sent to Salesforce. And if the person who's in the to field their email address is in your Salesforce, it will log that email as a task or an activity on their contact record. Chatter is the internal collaboration tool, which allows users to follow records to get information whenever a change is made to the record. Dashboards can potentially be posted to Chatter. You can mention people in Chatter. And you can even give access, limited access to aspects of Chatter, Chatter groups for collaboration with folks outside of your Salesforce user community. So I've put lead conversion here because it is a Salesforce administrator task to set up, but it has to do with leads, which we'll see later here in the marketing section. And so if you want to collect information from potential leads, you can create custom fields on your lead object. And you can, for example, post a form to a website and let potential leads fill out that information. It would get stored on their lead record. When you're ready to convert that lead into contact, account, and optionally opportunity, we want to make sure we don't lose that information. So we would need to create those custom fields on the appropriate object, account, contact, or opportunity, and map those fields over so that when the end user is working with the lead and converts the lead, we won't lose that information. So here's some automation related to leads and cases. So we have the ability to set up email to case. And cases, as I mentioned earlier, is for usually for service, so that customers can submit issues that they're having, and your support team can resolve those cases. And so you can set up an email address where if your customers send an email to that address, it will recognize that it's coming from a customer contact's email address and attach that case to that contact's account. And there are two flavors of email to case, so it's worth studying the differences and figure out which one is going to work in your situation. We can also set up, as I mentioned earlier, a website form that that your existing customers can use to submit cases and your prospective customers can use to create leads in Salesforce. Notice that we have web to lead and web to case and email to case. What's missing is email to lead. That is not a standard out of the box functionality. So once a case is submitted, we can automatically assign that to individual users or to a queue. We can also automatically send the person who submitted it a response that could be customized for the language that they speak. It could say something like, you know, we've received your case submission, here's the number, and we'll get back to you within X amount of time. And depending on the support agreement that you have with the customer, you may need to escalate a case if it's not resolved within a certain amount of time, and you can automate that. Approval processes can be for any kind of situation that needs approval before it can progress. For example, an opportunity that if a discount is over a certain amount, it has to be submitted for approval. And there's lots of flexibility and options in how those approval processes can be set up. So that's a big area of study all on its own. And big deal alerts can be set up so that if there's an opportunity that closes over a certain amount, that certain people will be notified. So if these very specific automation tools do not meet your needs, Salesforce comes with a number of very flexible automation tools that you can use to create any other kind of automation that you may need. So the oldest and simplest one is called workflow rules. And we are discouraged from creating new workflow rules in favor of the newer, more modern features, but you will often find many workflow rules in use. And sometimes if you have a very simple use case, you may even go ahead and create a workflow rule. One of the biggest drawbacks of workflow rules is that you can't control the order in which they fire. So along came Process Builder, which lets us control the sequence in which these kinds of automations fire. Process Builder can do almost everything that workflow rules can do and much more. Both tools can have time-dependent actions. So we can say, if this happens, do this action right away, or we could say, if this happens, do this action in 7 days or in 30 days, and we can queue those time-dependent actions up. And then if when the time comes, if it no longer meets the conditions, then it would get deleted from the queue. Otherwise, it would go into effect. And then the most in demand and in use and being enhanced feature is called flow. And flows take the kinds of abilities that previously were required programming and understanding and learning to write a programming language, and made it declarative, meaning point and click, but incorporating concepts from programming. So most notably variables and loops. So you can create very complex automation using flow. Salesforce does have a mobile app, so people can access Salesforce over mobile if you enable that. And there's a separate mobile app just for administrators so that administrators can do administrative functions on the go. For example, freezing a user or resetting a password for a user and more. So moving on, we have the small bit of marketing that comes with the Sales Cloud. Of course, Salesforce provides other tools in their marketing cloud and their product called Pardot. But we're not talking about those things today. We're just talking about within the Sales Cloud, this leads object, which we saw over here and also over here, is typically, leads are imported into this object from various sources by the marketing folks. And those leads are worked until they can be converted to accounts, contacts, and optionally opportunities. And then the other big piece is campaigns. And this is the ability to track within Salesforce the people that you're targeting with a specific campaign. And a campaign could be a social media marketing campaign. It could be billboards. It could be an event. It could be any effort that your organization is making to reach out to constituents. And then any opportunities that close that were influenced by those campaigns, and you would have to indicate that the opportunity was influenced by the campaign. Or you could say that any opportunities that close within a certain time frame after the start of the campaign were presumably influenced by that campaign. And then you can indicate the cost of running that campaign compared with the total of the opportunities that came in that were attributed to that campaign, and you can measure the ROI of your campaign. You can also set up a campaign hierarchy, and that's these are all skills to explore and learn about. So the Salesforce administrator has the ability to customize the user interface, and there are decisions to make between how much to customize the names of things in Salesforce to meet your organization's terminology, which then can take you out of step with the terminology that the Salesforce ecosystem is using, so that when you talk to an app integrator, for example, or you go to Dreamforce, or you go to a Dreamin' event, or you read the documentation, or you try to learn on Trailhead, if the terms you're using are different from the terms that the rest of Salesforce is using, that can make it confusing for your users. So that's a choice point to make all along here. So you could rename the tabs, and the tabs generally refer to an object. So for example, in nonprofits, sometimes they'll look at the opportunities and say, we don't use that word. Our users aren't going to understand what that means. Let's rename that tab or that object from opportunities to say gifts or donations, which is fine, except then everywhere else, people just have to know that that object is also known as opportunities. Apps are typically collections of tabs and other features across the top of your Salesforce while you're working that make it easily accessible, the pieces that you need. Be sure to check out the global UI settings. You have some options about how things will look to your end users. There's also session settings to check out. List views can be created on each tab for each object, and typically only allow you to show and filter on the fields within that one object, unless you have used formulas, as I mentioned, to display information from parents to children, or roll-ups to display information from children to parents. Then you can set up list views. You can enable your users to create list views, either that only they see or that they can share with everyone or with certain groups of people. And they can choose which columns of data to show and filter to choose which records to show. There's also inline editing, which is enabled in the global UI settings. And we're going to see record types in a minute. If you have record types and you want to do inline editing in a list view, you must explicitly filter for one record type at a time. Okay, so these features, together with profiles in the security area, can really help configure how the users interact with the data. Oftentimes we have very different kinds of records within one object. For example, in opportunities, you might have sales of products versus sales of service, and those could maybe have a completely different business process. Business process is a series of stages that the opportunity goes through. And then you might have a completely different page layout showing different fields or requiring different fields. And so these three tools, page layouts, record types, and business processes, along with which profiles these things are assigned to, can be used in different combinations depending on the needs of the organization. And finally, there is a separate place within the setup menu called Rename Tabs and Labels, where you can, as I mentioned earlier, change the names of the tabs, which effectively changes the name of the object for the end users, but not underlying. And you can also change the labels on the fields. And I often expect, and users when they first get started, expect that in the place where you can define and change things about a field, you would be able to rename the label there. And oftentimes when you can't figure out how to do it there, you figure it can't be done. So keep in mind that this is in a separate place in the setup menu. It's its own feature called Rename Tabs and Labels. And do that after careful consideration of that issue of whether to customize it for the organization's needs and get out of step with Salesforce, or to ask your organization to adopt Salesforce terminology so that you're more in step with the Salesforce ecosystem. And now we have it, a fleshed out set of buckets of tools in Salesforce. All we have left to do is flesh out reports and dashboards and security. So let's do that next. So we have a complex set of security tools. We can control access to the organization entirely, the ability to even log in. There are things we can set at the organization level about who can log in and when and from where. And what happens when they do that, two-step authentication and other security measures. Then, of course, a user needs their own user record so that they have a login and a password and things that are set there that determine what they can do. And also each user gets assigned a profile, which also determines when and from where they can log in. Now, there are all these different capabilities within Salesforce, many permissions. Some of them are set at the profile and permission set level. Some of them, for example, the ability to create a campaign is set on the user record. There's a checkbox called Marketing User, and you must have that box checked in order to be able to create campaigns. So some capabilities are controlled at the user record. Most are controlled at the profile level, where you can give or take away those permissions by checking the box or unchecking the box. And then optionally, you can give additional permissions. You can't take them away, but you can give additional permissions through a permission set. Now we have to control the access to the various objects, apps, tabs, page layouts, and record types, as I mentioned just a moment ago. And do you know where we do that? At the profile level. Again, profiles and permission sets is where we control access to all of these things and much more, in addition to the permission capabilities. Next, even if you have the access to the org, you can do the capability, you have access to the object, access to the record type, access to the page layout. Within that object, depending on how we have things set up, you may only have access to the records you own. In a public model, you can see all the records in the object if you have access to the object. But in a private model, you may only be able to view records that you don't own, or you may not even be able to view records that you don't own. So we have a sequence of tools in the OWD, the org-wide default. We define object by object, whether it's public or private, fully private, or read-only. And then per object, if we have made it private, we can then open up access to records you don't own by this sequence of tools. And then even more granularly, we can control the access to specific fields in those objects. And we do that with something called field level security, which actually happens once again in profiles and permission sets. And finally, access to reports, dashboards, email templates, and documents are controlled by folders. You create folders, you specify who can do what with those folders, and that gives those people access to all of those things. Next, we have reports. I'm not going to read this to you because I'm supposed to keep this version of this video short, but these are all the kinds of topics to study. And I would add one more, which is a new feature from Winter 20, row level summaries and dashboards. Here's a bunch of features to learn about dashboards. Don't forget that you can get reports and dashboards custom already made from the App Exchange. You can install them in your org and customize them to meet your specific needs. Here are some topics that are more advanced topics that are not typically studied or mastered as a Salesforce administrator. Some things are more for the advanced administrator, but these are terms that are worth familiarizing yourself with. And now I've given you the percentages. You should always check the current certification guide. They often tweak these percentages a little bit from time to time, from release to release. But generally speaking, I would say that if as I do, I consider these to be automation, and you add these two sections together, that's 21%. They may refer to these tools as more Sales Cloud and Service Cloud tools. So those you will see in the certification guide are high percentage. I guess that's this 13%. So all of this automation for sales and service, and these more generic automation tools make up a big part of what you need to know. Next, obviously, security, and followed then by your data modeling and fields and validation rules and duplicate management. All of these kinds of things is a large topic, followed by data management and reports and dashboards at 10%, and then a smattering, well, this is more Sales Cloud. So these topics combined with these topics, you can see there's overlap between automation and Sales and Service Cloud. So keep in mind not to neglect leads, lead mapping, and campaigns. And then the smaller topics are the org setup, the mobile apps, and the App Exchange. Thank you. I hope this has been helpful. I'm open to your feedback. If something is outdated, incorrect, or missing, or confusing, please let me know. Thanks.